Hey, Brian here, and if this is the first time you're checking out my channel, or if you're coming back for some more, I'm so excited that you're here. So this is a topic that I'm really passionate about, something I've been into for a long time, and before I even started this channel, I knew I wanted to make this series, and so I'm really glad that I get this opportunity now and have a platform to be able to do this and share some of my thoughts and my passion for mythology. So let's jump into some mythology, and Star Wars, and Lord of the Rings, and Marvel, and Harry Potter. We got a lot of ground to cover, so let's get into this. All right, so first thing we need to think about is why myths? Why should we study mythology? Why should we even consider mythology? I've come up with basically 3 reasons why I think it's important that we should look at myths. And the first one is that myths are universal. Across all cultures, peoples, tribes, myths are a foundational part of every culture. They're a foundational part of every human society. They have endured across all of human history. For that reason alone, it's very significant that we should look into it, that we should study the mythology, even as historians. The second reason is that myths are powerful narratives. Narratives are something that we just, as human beings, we just really connect with. When Jesus was on earth, he taught through parables, he taught through these stories, and those stories still resonate with people to this day. With my students in the classroom, mythology just connects. And so it's just so important that we look into these narratives and we say, well, what can we learn from these narratives? Why were these narratives told? Who benefited or who learned from these narratives? So these are important questions. The third thing is, I kind of hinted at with the first 2, myths actually shape culture. That myths can help shape identity, shape how people perceive themselves and how they want to be perceived by others. Why do people want to tell these stories? So a very significant book is this guy here, Joseph Campbell. This is the book Hero with a Thousand Faces. Check out Joseph Campbell, very influential in terms of the modern study of mythology, and a lot of my ideas and a lot of the things that I think most people teach when they teach mythology come from or attributed to Joseph Campbell. And he said this, he said, myths are public dreams and dreams are private myths. And so for him, it's inseparable what cultures are and what they're trying to achieve, how people view themselves from the mythology and from the myths that they tell. We jump into a study of mythology. It's important we recognize there's some different types of myths. So the first category you see is creation stories. The second one, you really get into origin stories. And the third, you get into the hero's journey. And that's going to be kind of where we focus in. By the way, if you like this presentation, if you're interested in this, this comes from Slides Mania. She does an amazing job putting together resources for Google Slides and PowerPoint. All her stuff is free to download. If you'd like to check out some great resources, the links can be in the description below. Also, if you would like this exact presentation, I would happily send you this for free. So you just need to email me at teachtheworld@gmail.com. Where does Star Wars and Marvel and Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings and all of this fit into this conversation? Let's start with Star Wars. Star Wars is a beautiful allegory. In fact, Joseph Campbell, I'll link that up here. You can watch. And he's asked about Star Wars and it being modern mythology. And he says that yes, it fits the archetype. It fits the pattern of what the hero's journey looks like. So really, it's an allegory of a coming of age story of the young man who's called out from his common everyday setting. He's called into a higher purpose, and along the way he has these old wise sages, mentors who reveal to him the path and the journey that he should take. There's that moment where he could turn his back on that and reject his calling, or he can embrace that calling and embrace what the true hero is supposed to be. So it's this allegory not only of childhood to adulthood, but also self-centeredness to self-sacrificing. In the most recent Star Wars movies, the story of Rey really didn't resonate with a lot of people because they got away from that simple story. That hero's journey is so significant, and it's a pattern that we're so familiar with. When you overcomplicate and you add in all these extra details and fan service and all these things, you lose the heart of that story. And I think the story of Rey, if you watch the new trilogy, let me know in the comments down below, what did you think of the most recent Star Wars films? When you lose that narrative arc of the hero's journey and you overcomplicate, you're going to lose that sort of appeal that Luke Skywalker had, for example. The Mandalorian has been Disney's attempt to really get back into that. The sort of the lone wolf, the lone ranger who gets called through this baby Yoda or through the child, and now he has this calling. He has to do some kind of heroic act to rescue and forget his self-centeredness as a bounty hunter and actually learn to be self-sacrificing. I think that has really resonated with a very wide audience. Now, if we talk about Marvel and the Avengers, Marvel has really stuck to this script. They've really stuck to that tried and tested storyline. to huge success. Jordan Peterson has actually, in some of his earlier work, laid out a lot of this in his lecture series, and I'll link that in the description. I think it's actually, is it over here? Or is it over here? I don't know, honestly. But it'll be here or here. One of his earliest works was actually called The Maps of Meaning, and he deals with mythology, Carl Jung, and some of this analytical psychology that really influenced Joseph Campbell, by the way. How these visuals and these myths really give people maps of meaning, a way of understanding their purpose through these stories. Marvel's really stuck to that script. Harry Potter is really infused with various mythological elements, even the names of a lot of the characters and locations J.K. Rowling really took from there. And talking about Lord of the Rings, we're talking about J.R. Tolkien in just a second. Tolkien was a huge fan of mythology, and he really wanted to create a modern myth, to give the English an updated myth, an updated set of mythology that kind of tied back in with this ancient mythology and give the British people a new set of moral guidance through the use of these myths. If we dig into the history of mythology and how mythology has been studied over the last several hundred years in the modern era, in the 19th century, mythology was actually ostracized and really pushed aside as something that should be studied. Max Muller, for example, in this period where reason and science becomes more and more prominent in society, particularly in European minds, Max Muller says that mythology is a disease of language, that it actually has no true purpose. So James Fraser, who gives this exhaustive study in The Golden Bough of mythology, says that societies move through three stages. That first you have primitive magic, then you move into an era of religion, and then from there you go into science. And he says that mythology is all-consuming in the first, still present in the second, and completely obsolete in the third. So once you get into this age of science, you don't need mythology anymore. What we see, though, in the 20th century is that you have a rebirth of myths in popular culture. And so J.R. Tolkien, who I already mentioned, he says this, he says, "We have come from God, and inevitably the myths woven by us, though they contain error, will also reflect a splintered fragment of the true light, the eternal truth that is with God. Our myths may be misguided, but they steer, however shakily, toward the true harbor, while materialistic progress leads only to a yawning abyss and the iron crown of the power of evil." The second one here is from C.S. Lewis, and he says, "The value of the myth is that it takes all the things we know and restores to them the rich significance which has been hidden by the veil of familiarity." C.S. Lewis goes on to say that a child is going to have a lot more enjoyment of his meal whenever he is actually a participant in the story and he becomes the hero of this story. And in fact, he says that by dipping the story in myth, we do not retreat from reality, we rediscover it. The last one here is from Joseph Campbell himself, and he says that mythology is not a lie. Mythology is poetry. It's metaphorical. It has been well said that mythology is the penultimate truth. Penultimate because the ultimate cannot be put into words. It is beyond words, beyond images, beyond that bounding rim of the Buddhist's wheel of becoming. Mythology pitches the mind beyond that rim, to what can be known but not told. Campbell really gets to the heart of this, that mythology is more than what we see, that mythology has a hidden meaning. If we want to understand culture, if we want to understand humanity, we have to look into the myths that are told, and we have to see what we can see from them. Why should we study myths? Why, as a historian, do I use myths in my class? Other than the fact that they're very engaging narratives. It's because myths actually reveal a lot about how people see themselves. How do they view themselves? What stories do they want to pass down? These are not just random. They are chosen, they're passed down. Even when we get to Homer and the Iliad and the Odyssey, when we get to Virgil, they were retelling stories that have been passed down maybe for generations, and they put them into a canonical form. When we dig into these myths, when we look at myths from all over the world, when we look at these myths from various locations and various cultures, it's going to be significant to see what can we draw out from these myths in terms of how people see themselves, how they see the world. And I'm just excited that you're here. I'm excited that you're willing to check this out. So please go ahead, like, subscribe, hit subscribe. Let me know in the comments what you want to see in terms of mythology. Who's your favorite mythological figure? What stories would you like to talk about in this series? Maybe in your culture, where you're coming from, there's a particular myth that really resonates with you. I'd love to hear that from you. All right, everybody, time to sign off. I'm Brian, and I hope that you guys have a great day and that you check out the series as we move forward. Bye.